Good morning. We'll call this hearing to order. Thank you for being with us to vote. Today, the committee welcomes Acting Director Russ Vought to discuss the CFPB semi-annual report to Congress. This hearing is an opportunity to discuss what a new day at the CFPB looks like, and truly a new day in a very good way. Finally, we have a bureau that respects the limits of its authority. A bureau that follows its mandate instead of pursuing an ideological agenda. The decisions that are made at the CFPB affect everyday life for Americans and their families. They deserve a bureau that recognizes a simple truth. Access to affordable financial products is a key part of consumer protection. Consumers must be treated fairly. Bad actors must be held accountable. I believe the best way to protect consumers is through competition, choice, and clear rules, not through heavy-handed Washington control that leaves consumers with fewer and fewer options. In South Carolina, I hear from constituents who are working hard but still feeling squeezed. For them, a financial product is not a political talking point. It can be the bridge between getting by and getting ahead. That is why affordability starts with access. As you know, many consumers choose to use overdraft services to make ends meet, but the Biden CFPB attempted to impose price controls that would have largely eliminated access to those services. I want to stop there for a second because it's such an easy thing to run by and then later on it will be attacked and demonized. But the truth of the matter is that when price controls are put in place, banks and creditors eliminate access. Classic point is when we had the 10% cap conversation. Director Vought, you probably remember when we were having as a nation this conversation around capping credit cards at 10%. The fact of the matter is that when you cap credit cards at 10%, what you ultimately do is you eliminate credit opportunities for those having less than a 750 credit score. The vast majority of Americans have less than a 750 credit score, which means that they would ultimately have to go somewhere else other than a bank or a regulated entity to find access to credit, which means that they would become even in greater jeopardy than before. We rejected that harmful rule. When Washington writes rules that push responsible products out of the market, people do not stop needing those products. They are just left with limited choices, higher costs, and worse alternatives. Regulatory relief is not just about banks or businesses, it's about the impact on the people they serve. When unnecessary rules drive up compliance costs, those costs show up as higher fees and fewer options for families and small businesses. The rules should be clear, lawful, and focused on actual harm. A responsible CFPB should provide clear rules of the road so consumers, innovators, and community institutions know what is expected of them. For too long, too many policies were built on shaky legal ground or the idea that Washington knows best. During the Biden administration, the CFPB functioned as an activist organization that ignored statutory limits on its authority and effectively became part of the White House's messaging operation. That's why virtually all of the Biden CFPB policies are now gone, either struck down in court, overturned by Congress, or rescinded because they were so partisan and often illegal. In contrast, clear and durable rules help businesses compete, banks lend, and consumers access the products they need with confidence that the CFPB's policies have staying power. Republicans have also taken action to right-size the Bureau itself. Congress substantially reduced the CFPB's statutory funding cap, placing meaningful limits on an agency that had operated far too long without sufficient budgetary discipline and with bloated staffing. Acting Director Vought, I appreciate the work that you have done to rein in the agency's overreach, rewrite problematic rulemakings, modernize supervision, and operate within a responsible budget. Finally, we should have an honest conversation about the structure of the CFPB. Democrats created an agency with a, with a single director and extraordinary power. If they now believe one person has too much power and control over the Bureau, they should work with Republicans on structural reforms that would reduce partisanship, increase accountability, and bring long-term stability to the CFPB. The CFPB should protect consumers and preserve access by promoting competition and choice, not by imposing price controls or heavy-handed mandates. That is the standard I will use today, and I look forward to your testimony. Ranking Member Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Donald Trump is the most corrupt president in our nation's history, not by a little bit, but by a wide margin. The president and his family are enriching themselves by billions of dollars with shady crypto ventures. Pardons are handed out to white-collar criminals like it's Super Sales Day at Macy's, reportedly with a $2 million price tag per pardon. Trump allies fork over millions of dollars for the president's gold-encrusted ballroom or one of his other vanity projects, and then those allies get a regulatory favor or a big government contract or both. Trump and his cronies get rich, and hardworking middle-class families pick up the tab. One clear example of how families pay for Trump's corruption is over at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. For one solid year while he ran for office, Donald Trump promised to bring down prices on day one. Those were his words, on day one. We are now on day 541, and prices are up, 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 and President Trump claims affordability is a hoax. One of the tools available to Trump to keep costs low is the CFPB, to return money to American families when they've been cheated. But instead of delivering help for people who have been scammed, Trump's acting director of the CFPB, Mr. Vought, has attacked the agency, and according to a report I am releasing today, where we gathered the data together, those attacks on the CFPB have cost American families $26.5 billion so far. The CFPB's whole job is to fight for the little guy. Since it opened its doors in 2011, it has returned over $21 billion directly to families who have been ripped off by massive corporations, shady lenders, and big banks. Now, that's great for American consumers, but not so great for the giant banks and big-time cheaters who have gotten caught. So President Trump took a side between those two. Instead of helping families when they are cheated, he put Mr. Vought in charge to try to shut down the agency. On multiple occasions, Mr. Vought tried to fire nearly all the staff and shut off the agency's funding. Mr. Vought has clearly made it his mission to delete the agency from existence. He has failed. So Mr. Vought and President Trump have moved on to Plan B. Instead of shutting the agency down, just use it as another corrupt way for Trump and his buddies to make more money for themselves. Now, how do you take a consumer agency and turn it into a cash grab for corporate cheaters? Acting Director Vought has figured out a way. Take a look at just some of the examples of what he's done over the past 18 months. Because it got caught scamming its customers, Navy Federal Credit Union has been ordered by the CFPB to return $80 million to the service members who had been cheated. Director Vought came in and said, oh, that's okay. Navy Federal can keep the $80 million, and the people who got cheated just don't get any money back. J.P. Morgan Bank of America, Wells Fargo are a few of the bank owners of Zelle who got sued by the CFPB for allowing people who use Zelle to get scammed out of $870 million. Mr. Vought dropped the charges, and the people who got cheated, they get nothing. Regions Bank had settled a case with the CFPB, and the bank had agreed to refund consumers $141 million. Vought dropped the settlement, and the customers got nothing. Capital One was sued by CFPB for cheating its customers out of $2 billion. And once again, Trump and Vought said, keep the money. And the people who got cheated got nothing. Look, it's a long list, but the important thing to remember here is the people who got cheated are millions of Americans who are just trying to get by. And the people who got away with cheating them were giant companies that, in many cases, had already agreed to make refunds to the people they cheated. I'd like to enter into the record letters from organizations across the country representing the people who have been hurt by the Trump Vought CFPB shutdown, Mr. Chairman. So I have to ask, why would Trump and Vought do this? Just follow the money. The same group of billionaires that poured millions into Trump's political campaigns, into his ballroom, into his crypto projects, are the very same people who cheated hardworking Americans and then got a free pass from Donald Trump and Russ Vought. This is corruption, and Acting Director Vought is right at the center of it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Today we will hear from the Acting Director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Russ Vought, on the CFPB semi-annual report to the Congress. Acting Director Vought, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for being here. You are now recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Scott, Ranking Member Warren, and members of the committee for the invitation to appear before you today as I reach the end of my tenure at the CFPB. I am pleased to present the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau's semi-annual report to Congress, as well as to provide you an update on our activities. After being appointed acting director, our team took a look under the hood and found an agency that was weaponized, out of control, and had gone far beyond its statutory mandate. Under previous administrations, this agency actually imposed huge costs on the American people and stifled the innovation and resourcefulness that is necessary for a strong economy. Consumers paid the price literally in the form of higher prices, reduced product offerings, increased borrowing expenses, and misuse of their taxpayer dollars. The Council of Economic Advisors found that consumers cost them $237 to $370 billion since 2011. Instead of going down this destructive path, we have steered the Bureau towards operating with humility, accountability, and fiscal responsibility. Regulation should be justified by statute, not the whims of ideologues at the Bureau. Supervision should be precisely targeted to avoid stifling economic growth and innovation and disproportionately increasing compliance costs. And enforcement should be based on clear violations of the law, not on advancing political agenda outside of accountability and oversight from elected officials and the American people. The Bureau's express purpose is to implement and enforce federal consumer financial law consistently so that all consumers have access to markets that are fair, transparent, and competitive. While we have sought to downscale this agency to the maximum extent possible and rein in its abuses, we have continued to operate in accordance with that purpose. The Bureau's enforcement actions are now focused on addressing actual harm to consumers and ensuring due process. President Trump ensured that the Bureau, along with other so-called independent agencies, are accountable to leaders elected by the American people and no longer operate with impunity. Recently, the Supreme Court confirmed that no such independent agencies exist in slaughter. The Bureau's regulatory actions are no longer developed in isolation, and the rest of government works to improve its proposals through OIRA. I have also reoriented our internal processes. In supervision, the Bureau focuses its resources on pressing threats to consumers and in the areas that are clearly within the Bureau's statutory authority. In the past, the supervision program pushed well past the limits of its authority under the guise of consumer protection. The Bureau also now avoids duplication of supervision by other regulators. Supervision is conducted with transparency and respect, as examiners announce through the humility pledge they must read at the beginning of all examinations. Enforcement also is being guided by a new set of principles so that the CFPB focuses on addressing actual harm to consumers, ensuring due process, seeking collaboration, and promoting efficiency. Under President Trump, there's been a paradigm shift in the way that the CFPB regulates, supervises, enforces the laws as required by the Dodd-Frank Act. And though we have improved a great deal about how it operates, the Bureau remains structurally defective, and I do not believe that it should exist in its current form. I have been committed to running it in a responsible manner and addressing real harms instead of remaking financial markets in service of a radical political agenda. If confirmed, I know that President Trump's nominee, Brian Johnson, will do a great job in continuing to steer the CFPB in an appropriate manner. Ultimately, however, CFPB must be subject to Congress's most basic function, the appropriations process, to ensure accountability and legitimize an otherwise unserious agency. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Vogt. The best way, we each get 5 minutes, by the way, and I'm pretty consistent with asking for us to just take 5 minutes. And so that includes questions and answers. I'll start. The best way to protect consumers and increase affordability is not through heavy-handed regulation, but through competition and choice. When over-regulation pushes responsible products out of the market, consumers are left with fewer choices and higher costs. Virtually all of the Biden administration's CFPB policies have been struck down in court, eliminated by Congress, rescinded, or rewritten. Many of those policies would have eliminated consumers' access to important services, and I am grateful that this administration is correcting that overreach. We know overregulation has a cost. How is the CFPB's return to clear, lawful, and appropriately tailored regulation strengthening competition and reducing unnecessary costs across the financial marketplace to promote affordable financial products?
Thank you, Senator. I think the biggest way that we're doing that right now is that we've ended regulation by enforcement. We're giving the American people clear understanding of where we will supervise and enforce, and it is not going to be in areas that you all have not given us statutory authority. In addition, we are interpreting our rules as the statutes have articulated and being very, very careful not to go beyond those statutes, particularly with regard in the aftermath of recent Supreme Court decisions. So our view is that Congress makes these laws. CFPB has been given enormous tools, and we want to be very, very cautious in using those tools.
Excellent. Leads right into my next question. Under former Director Chopra, the CFPB frequently ignored required rulemaking procedures and sought to make new policies through guidance, press releases, blog posts, or threats of enforcement. You've reversed that trend by adhering to proper rulemaking procedures and rescinding guidance that was legally dubious or overly burdensome. Can you discuss why an activist CFPB that regulates through enforcement or post or press releases or threats is harmful to consumers?
Well, it raises the costs on them, and when you have a supervision approach and enforcement posture that honestly resembles a sue and settle approach, you don't have clear guidance to the financial markets, to the regulated entities in any way that allows people to take risks, to innovate when they feel that their innovation is going to have the hard edge of a regulator come behind them. And that doesn't mean that people don't make sense. But when we see something that we're concerned about, our first step now is to figure out what's going on and to get it fixed, remediation. We want to encourage self-reporting. We want reconciliation. If we can't do it at that level, then we will take adversarial action. And we are underway in a number of those instances. So our belief is that we want to encourage innovation in financial products because people will benefit from that. And I'll probably get asked about Navy Federal Credit Union. We want people to have overdraft protection. If you've ever lived paycheck to paycheck, overdraft protection ensures that your check doesn't bounce and you pay a worse fee because of it, and it's often very embarrassing. Overdraft fee is designed to protect that gap, and the previous director came in without a rule, without a statute, and put out guidance that was different than the previous set of policies, and came in and Navy Federal Credit Union, as a result, was out of compliance with that new guidance that had never gone through notice and comment. We put an end to that. That's the type of thing that we're doing, Senator.
Well, I have a couple other questions for you, but I'm going to skip my questions. So I think you made a really important point that I want to highlight, and then you can have time to comment if there's time left. But I will say without any question, as a kid that grew up in poverty in a single-parent household, the one thing I understand is that when people with good intentions try to limit access, the unintended consequence is higher prices for people living in poverty. A classic example is that every single time you limit some fee that you think is bad, you actually increase the cost on the consumer. As an example, you limit the overdraft fee, but what you're actually doing is you're sending sometimes consumers to other alternatives that are painful, onerous, and expensive. I remember having to go to a rent-to-own place to get the first microwave we had in the house. Why did we do that? Because we couldn't afford any other options, because credit was not available. And what we do not need to see is a return Congress and the Senate trying to make good things better, actually making it worse.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Acting Director Vought, since you took over the CFPB, the Bureau has dropped more than 40 enforcement actions against giant corporations that have cheated American families. That's 40. And instead of having to pay back the consumers they cheated, you've told these corporations, keep the money for yourself, consumers get nothing. Let's look at one example. In 2023, Toyota agreed to pay $50 million to settle a claim that thousands of consumers were tricked into buying add-on insurance and warranties that they didn't need and they didn't want. Secret emails show that a Toyota lobbyist reached out to you, quote, to see if there's a positive path forward on their already agreed on settlement, to ask you for help after they had already agreed to repay the consumers they had cheated. Now, 2 weeks after Toyota's lobbyist reached out to you, he followed up with your second in command and said he had also flagged the issue for the White House. Oh, and Toyota did one other thing before they reached out to you. They donated $1 million to the president's inauguration. And just like that, you reversed their already agreed upon settlement. So, Acting Director Vought, that affected thousands of people. How much on average did Toyota's customers get scammed out of?
Well, I think the way you've just characterized that is inaccurate. And I never
facts
talked
are all
with that
documented,
lobbyist.
Mr. Vought.
And let me just explain that you specifically, when you wrote the law, did not give the CFPB authority over car dealerships. This was a novel theory that did not have a basis in statute, and we dismissed it.
Mr. Vought, Toyota had already agreed that they had cheated people out of money and agreed to pay the money back. And I'm asking you, when you took the action to say to Toyota, you keep the money and let all those people who got cheated just go suck air, when that happened, how much was each of those people, how much had they been cheated out of?
Senator,
I assume you had looked at the file
Senator,
and knew what it was that you were letting Toyota keep the money for.
Senator, one of the hallmarks of our stewardship of the agency is we're not going to use the sue and settle consent orders
Oh, listen, I understand that.
to go after
I'm asking,
companies when
do
we don't
you
have the
know
statutory
how much
authority to do
each
so.
of those people had been cheated out of? I'm kind of thinking maybe you don't. It ranged from $700 to $2,500 each. So if you were a Toyota customer who got scammed out of hundreds of dollars and you were in line to get a refund and you found out that Toyota sent $1 million to the president and now Toyota doesn't have to pay you back, you might look at that and think it sounds like corruption. Acting Director Vought, how many of the enforcement actions and investigations that you dropped were against companies that have donated to President Trump.
We've made every determination with regard to supervision and enforcement without regard to anything other than
That's
the
not my
statute
question, Mr.
and the
Vogt,
charge
and
that
you
we've been
know it.
given at the agency.
How many have donated to President Trump? You've dropped 40-plus actions for companies. How many of those companies have donated to President Trump?
I have no idea because
You
I
have
never
no
look at
idea.
such things.
Actually, some of them were telling you. Toyota, for example, said, oh, we've reached out to the White House, and it's a matter of public record, where they donated $1 million. You know, so I've got a list here of companies that cut checks to President Trump that we know of. Apple, Bank of America, Capital One, JP Morgan. You want me to keep going on this? Toyota, Walmart, Meta, and that's just at the CFPB. In 2025, across federal agencies, the Trump administration dropped cases against more than 50 companies that we can document have financial ties to the president or to his inner circle. So let's take a look at one more case, one you have mentioned. Navy Federal Credit Union got caught by the CFPB charging illegal overdraft fees. If you hadn't dropped in and called off the settlement, they had agreed to a settlement, how much would our service members have been reimbursed for getting cheated? How much?
Those fees were not illegal, and remember that this was a credit union made up of service members who would have had to pay for that cost.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. They were illegal, they agreed to pay.
Senator Reynolds?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of different questions I want to do, but let me provide you with a few minutes here to just clarify and finish answering the questions that I think are good questions from the ranking member, but I think your answers might help to clear that up. I don't think you were given the opportunity to answer them. When we write a statute and we give authority to an executive branch office to execute a law, we lay out very clearly within the statute what those authorities are. And if you go beyond those authorities, you're violating a law, in my opinion. Could you clarify a little bit? Is there a statute that would have provided the CFPB with the authority to go after auto manufacturers?
No, Senator, and I agree with you.
Explain that a little bit, please.
No, I mean, when you all pass statutes and give us authority to rule make, you're giving a delegated authority to us that is something we have to be very, very good stewards of. And the last thing we want to do is go beyond how you've articulated, or if there's discretion in a law, to do it outside of how you've intended us to use that law. And so we have been very cautious at CFPB in rolling back guidance that was in conflict with the statute or certainly never entertained by the statute. And that's really what we've done since I've been there at the CFPB.
So with regard to the issues that have been brought up here so far in this meeting, it was a determination that the CFPB, prior to, or in the previous administration, had decided outside of what would have been a statutorily directed order, that they were simply going to go after a particular company because they thought they could exceed what the authority was that was granted by Congress. We talked a little bit about sue and settle. Talk about what that means with regard to what the CFPB was doing in terms of being coercive to businesses and what the cost could be for those businesses if this hadn't been corrected by the Trump administration and the corrections to the CFPB.
CFPB has the authority to do administrative consent orders in conjunction with their supervision and enforcement authorities. And so they have the ability to really put the onus on a particular company and make a finding and have penalties that accrue as a result of that, some of them tolling at a very high level. And so if you're one of those companies, what are you going to do? You're going to settle to make the pain stop, regardless of...
Any limit on how large those costs could be if they don't settle?
They can get up to very, very large amounts, and that's one of the reasons why you see companies settling even when they know that they have done nothing wrong and not contesting.
In other words,
issues.
they're making a business decision saying, I got to deal with a bureaucrat, and the bureaucrat can make life real miserable for my entire entity.
Precisely.
Kind of like if a prosecutor walks in and says, I'm going to charge you with a felony, but if you make a deal with me to take a misdemeanor, I'll let you off easy. And the guy looks at it and says, I'm innocent, but I can't afford to pay the damn bill for a felony, so maybe it's easier for me to just take the misdemeanor. Is that what this was amounting to?
That's exactly what we have found.
But in this particular case, we're talking millions of dollars that somebody has to pay.
Correct. And
What about the credit unions? In this particular case, who owns the credit unions?
the members of the credit union themselves, in this case, are service members.
And so they really understand that, don't they? So when the CFPB walks into Navy or Naval Standard Credit Union and says, we're going to charge you money for the way that you've treated your people, who ends up paying the bill? I don't think we made that very clear.
Service members and their families.
Service members and their families pay the fee and the penalty. Was there more than just a payback? Was there going to be any kind of penalties or any costs involved in doing this in terms of responding to the CFPB demand?
They actually paid their penalty. We did not cancel that. It was the redress is what we canceled it. So we basically froze it in time when we came in.
And so along with demanding that they redistribute some of the funds, there was a cost to the owners of the credit union for paying a penalty to the CFPB. What does the CFPB do with that money?
We put it in the civil penalty fund, civil monetary penalty fund, for redress where sometimes a company that's bankrupt can't and has been a fraudulent actor can't pay their redress.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Reed?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This vote, we have a housing supply crisis in the United States, which is obvious to everyone. Yet the Trump administration is sitting on $750 million in home building funds, mostly from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the Capital Magnet Fund, that could build or rehabilitate about 63,000 homes across the country. And these programs are not funded by the taxpayer. They're funded from a portion of the profits of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. And 22 of my colleagues joined me in writing on June 30th to urge you to release these funds, which you're holding. Will you commit to release these funds, and when will you do it?
Happy to look at that. Did see your letter, and we will happy to follow up, and we're looking to expeditiously move on all of those apportionments as quickly as we can.
How quickly is quickly?
Well, it's halfway through the fiscal year. We obviously want to make sure that the funds get to the agency that they can be spent.
You've been sitting on those funds now for more than a year, and I doubt that you need much more time. And I would urge you to respond quickly, actually immediately. You've also proposed a regulation to overhaul the federal grant-making process that would effectively end merit-based decisions and give political appointees unprecedented control of $1 billion in federal grants. And there have been 350,000 comments already about your proposal. Most of them, I suspect, are in opposition. In fact, we've already seen the effects of this kind of approach to decision-making. Last month, the Trump administration began dismantling the NSF Ocean Observation Initiative and critical real-time monitoring of the oceans. And the political appointees who made the decision clearly didn't know what they were doing, not understanding the science, and were forced to quickly reverse their decision. So how will this rule ensure that political litmus tests won't be used to make grants?
Senator, I think that this rule is about ensuring that we have democratic control of the spending that is going out at executive branch agencies, and so that when you have a policy official in charge of an agency based on themselves being in a cabinet, that those are the ones that are making the final call on how and what we're spending money on through the grant program. And I was up here last year, I think you were there, talking about the rescissions process. And one of the biggest questions I got was, well, Mr. Director, why don't you just not spend it on this or that? You have an opportunity to impose your own policy objectives. And to the extent that that's a valid argument, this 2 CFR is part of that process. We want to make sure that NIH is not spending money on gain-of-function research that contributed to the last pandemic just because Tony Fauci, who was not a policy official of a political nature, decides that it's a wise thing to do.
Excuse me, so you have a non-doctor, non-scientist making decisions about scientific research, which seems to me to be a fairly bad approach. Let me move on.
In that case, Senator Jay Bhattacharya would be a scientist and a doctor.
I was the lead sponsor of the Military Lending Act based on my experience as a soldier. And in February 2025, I sent you a very simple letter asking for an explanation, and I still not have had a response. In fact, you're not at all very responsive. In June 2025, you testified to me at the Appropriations Committee that you specifically made military lending an enforcement priority. Well, let's look at the record. Before your tenure, the CFPB took 40 enforcement actions that yielded $363 million in relief for service members. You have taken only 2 enforcement actions, securing only $6.75 million. And again, as Senator Warren has pointed out, you released the Navy Federal Credit Union from an obligation to refund $80 million in illegally charged fees to U.S. service members. And this argument that, oh, they'll all pay because it's a cooperative, these people were denied funds, and you said, stop, we're not going to pay them back. You've reduced the Office of Service Members Affairs from 47 employees to 9. You've reduced the CFPB supervision staff by 85%, and you've cut the number of annual exams from hundreds to only 70. You are basically abandoning the troops and the soldiers, sailors, and airmen that are being exploited by payday lenders, by all sorts of used car dealers and everything else. And to me, that's a shame, because you'll probably be the first one to stand up and say what you do for service members. You're not doing anything for service members. My time's expired.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Director. I appreciate all your work on reducing the number of rules and regulations. For an agency to get rid of a rule or regulation under normal procedure of the APA, how long does it take?
It takes most of the time over a year, quite some time.
Yes. Do we have rules and regulations that exist that are in violation of the Supreme Court's decision in the West Virginia versus EPA case and Loper-Bright?
Possibly, Senator. One doesn't immediately come to mind, but the way that we have interpreted those 2 decisions would be extremely cautious with the discretion that exists in the law. For instance, expanding to a larger participant in a market that the last director did and got CRA. That's the kind of thing where we've used our caution greatly.
Well, here's my suggestion. As you, I'm sure, know, Mr. Director, there is a good cause exception to the notice and comment requirements of the APA. And basically the APA says, I think the words it uses, if there's an existing rule and regulation that is contrary to the public interest, an agency doesn't have to go through the 1-year process. The agency can just unilaterally say this is not in the public interest. Now, if an existing rule and regulation is in violation of Loper-Bright and West Virginia v. EPA, why couldn't our agencies take an aggressive posture and just say, it violates the Constitution as interpreted by the United States Supreme Court, and it is no more.
We can, and in my OIRA hat, we have put out guidance to that effect to make sure the agencies know that. Here's the tension, just so we're all clear. The courts haven't necessarily caught up with that understanding of the statute, and so for those big rules that we are concerned about, that we want the opportunity to defend during our time in office, the tension is a strategic one about which ones we use and why as a
Well,
as a
they're
tool.
going to sue you anyway, no matter what you do. Because every one of these rules or regulations is making somebody money. Now, it's costing our business community a lot of money, which I know in part leads to higher prices because those costs are passed on. But I would strongly encourage you, since you're going to be sued anyway, to make use of the good cause exception to the APA. Clearly, if you look at a statute and it violates, or a rule, and it violates West Virginia v. EPA or Loper Bright, that's contrary to the public interest, and there's your standard. And I would strongly encourage y'all to do that. Just if you can give me a ballpark number, how many rules and regulations have you gotten rid of or are trying to get rid of?
Well, right now, the President gave us a goal of 10 to 1, deregulatory to 1. We achieved 6 in the first term. 10 I thought might be a harder challenge.
Sure.
We did 129 to 1 in the first term, and we think we're going to have similar levels of success.
Is that in the thousands?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. My second point is doesn't require a response, but I want you to think about something. Inflation is back. Now, we all have our opinion about the cause. I think it's more than just the conflict in Iran. But that's a debate for another day. We have to give people relief in the cost of living. I really would ask you to consider through the agency you're now director of or otherwise, giving people some relief on their medical debt being reported to the rating agencies. I'm not saying wipe out their debt. I'm not saying that. I don't know whether it's legitimate or not, but nobody understands when you go to the hospital, you get a bill, and nobody can ever explain it. But the collectors report that debt to the rating agencies, which ruins people's credit, which makes it harder for them to pay the money back. Now, my friends, and I'm coming, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much.
But I've got 10 seconds under the Reed rule.
You've just used 6 of them, though.
I know. I really think you ought to give some people some relief from medical debt, if not permanently, temporarily. Just don't report it to the rating agencies. Give them a break. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've been very indulgent.
Senator Warner?
I get the Kennedy 36-second add-on.
Absolutely not.
Dr. Vought, it's good to see you again. I know you're here in your role as acting at CFPB. Let me state for the record, I totally disagree with your comments about this agency was weaponized, your treatment of the workforce. You have gone through some dramatic reductions there. What's the current level of workforce at CFPB?
1071.
Do you expect that, and everybody is now back in full-time 5 days a week, I hope?
They are on their way back into 5 days a week. Everyone's been working 5 days a week. We have temporarily put on pause for confirmation of our nominee on the decision of pulling people back from the regions to DC.
Okay. Well, I extraordinarily concerned that you've cut the enforcement from 487 to just 127. This agency, not always agreed with it, but it put billions back into Americans' pockets, Senator Kennedy, and when there have been abuses, and to walk away from that is really concerning to me. I'm not going to get you, unless I can also raise, what is your obsessive concern about CDFIs? I mean, CDFIs provide a source of funding for underserved communities. Secretary Bessent assured me, and when I and 19 Democrats voted for its confirmation, he was a supporter. This Congress continues to fund them. We have 34 senators in CDFI caucus, including the Senate Finance Chair and the Senate Banking Committee Chair. Why won't you release their money?
We have released the money for fiscal year 25 and 26. The money that has not been apportioned is for 26 and 27.
You're saying to me, and please stay on the record, that all the money in 25 has been released back to the actual CDFI.
25 and 26 is,
And 26.
from OMB's perspective, has been apportioned to the Treasury Department. If I can answer your question, my concern, and we have had a dim view of this program as an administration, but there's tons of examples, and I can go through them, of where in the last administration they were incredibly woke. And we have concerns with that. But also, as it pertains to this committee and the CFPB in general, CDFIs are exempt from ability
Well,
to
excuse me,
repay.
sir, you know, you have, so all the 14 Republicans, including Chairman Scott, including my co-chair, Mike Crapo, including your Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, have been supportive of helping underserved communities, and they have been supportive of all these woke institutions all over America?
I think that there are certainly bipartisan views on this program, but let me just give you an example. When you have $500,000 to Inclusive Action, which is suing the federal government to prevent ICE from investigating the fraudulent use of funds to illegals, that is a major concern that we have. Now, we have released
Love to see
the
your
funds.
documentation. I got 2 minutes left here, because this is the one I really want to come to. I respect your career in government. You've done a lot of things in think tanks, and you're serving the government in a lot of ways. Yeah, but your own comments, and this is very important to me, and I'm sure Senator Van Hollen will raise it as well. We got a heck of a lot of federal workers. And the cuts from ill-informed Doge and a smart Doge, I would have been supportive of. But this ill-informed Doge has had enormous effects. I think facts will show and history will show it actually costs the taxpayer money, and I'd love to work on a full audit of Doge. But here's the real question I want to get to. You said in your writings that you wanted to traumatize federal workforce. So, Director Vought, as a former CEO myself,
That's not what I said, Senator, but I'm happy to clarify previous statements.
listen, your writings were very clear. You wanted to make sure federal workers felt like they shouldn't go to work. You felt like you wanted to add trauma. So I'm asking you, as business guy to government employee, give yourself a grade on how much trauma you've brought to federal workforce.
We've done aggressive actions to live and have fiscally
So
responsible government.
give me a, and please don't.
I don't accept the premise of the question, Senator.
Well, no,
I have done that.
you know, the thing is, you want to ask the questions, get elected and sit up here. You got a United States Senator asking you a question. Give yourself a grade, A, B, C, D, F, on how well you've done at traumatizing our workforce.
I think we've done an incredible job in running the CFPB, and I'm excited
You know,
to be here
sir,
to answer
sir,
questions about that.
I was a business guy, so don't, use bureaucratic mumbo jumbo. Did you get an A, a B, a C, or did you fail? I actually think you did with your goal of traumatizing and undermining the federal workforce. I think you did a pretty damn good job. What grade would you give them?
We've done an excellent job at running the CFPB.
Sir, I would say excellent job on terrorizing and traumatizing our federal workforce. And again, I go back and thank the chairman and so many of us who've been supporters of CDFIs. His unwillingness to continue to release on a regular basis congressionally appropriated bipartisan funds is outrageous.
Senator Ricketts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to address something that I've heard in this room from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle with regard to the CFPB being the only cop on the beat. I can tell you that from my personal experience, that is absolutely not the case. That as governor of Nebraska, I had a Department of Banking. And if any of our consumers in Nebraska came and approached us with a problem, no matter how big the bank was, we would investigate to make sure that that consumer got the resolve that they needed from whatever problem that they had. If they had some sort of problem with the banking department, we got involved. But it wasn't just the Department of Banking in the state of Nebraska to do that, right? The OCC could do it, FDIC, FTC, the Fed, CFTC, the NCUA. All these organizations could protect the consumer and take up consumer complaints. And they have. We don't need one big giant organization that is trying to oversee all of this. We need the organizations that are responsible for this to do their jobs. The CFPB is just another added layer of bureaucracy on top of regulatory organizations who are responsible for doing this. I want to take the example of crypto kiosk ATM scams. The state of Nebraska and 28 other states have passed laws to protect consumers on this and combat those. In Nebraska, from September of 2025 till June of 2026, the Nebraska Department of Banking returned $325,000 back to consumers in our state stemming from these crypto ATM fraud and scams. It wasn't the CFPB that did that. That was the state of Nebraska Department of Banking. In the Clarity Act, I worked to ensure that that bill, the Clarity Act, preserves the authority of states to enforce laws such as these crypto ATM laws that have helped protect consumers. And to say that nobody else is out there looking out for consumers is just simply not true. It's wrong. We ought not to try to scare consumers by saying if the CFPB is not doing its job, somehow there's not a cop on the beat. It's just factually false. And we shouldn't try and scare consumers that way. Protecting consumers, again, doesn't require the CFPB. It requires agencies like the state of Nebraska to do their jobs. Anyway, so now let's talk about the CFPB and the impact on affordability. While the Biden-era CFPB was protecting consumers, what it actually was trying to protect consumers, what it was actually doing was making it more expensive to serve. We've kind of covered that a little bit. Here's the problem. Compliance costs are expensive for small businesses. Big companies can hire lots of compliance people. A small rural business in rural Nebraska doesn't have the ability to hire the same number of compliance people that a Fortune 500 company does. Take the Biden-era 1071 small business lending rule through Dodd-Frank. Congress told the Bureau to collect 13 points of data. The Biden-era CFPB expanded that to 81 points of data and reached down to a lender making as few as 100 loans a year. My colleague, Senator Kennedy, led the CRA against that one. And I appreciate the fact that you've revised that rule, so thank you very much. There was another 11th hour rule the Biden administration rushed through and implemented very poorly. The digital payments rule stretched the CFPB's authority to supervise and examine non-bank digital consumer payment applications, again, completely out of the CFPB's purview. And many of these payment companies were, of course, already regulated at the federal and state level. This expanded authority without properly identifying the specific market it sought to supervise or the risk within the market that existing regulation already doesn't mitigate. And by the way, these payment apps accounted for just 1% of CFPB's complaints in 2023. The cost-benefit analysis of this rule is insufficient and unrealistic. It estimated that the cost of a single CFPB exam was just $25,000. I'm sure, Mr. Vought, you would agree with me. No bank would agree that a CFPB investigation or audit is only going to cost $25,000. I led the CRA on this one to overturn this rule. I was pleased to see it overturned. So, Director Vought, when the CFPB writes a rule like these, who ends up paying the costs?
Consumers pay the cost with higher amounts of spending, and sometimes the product doesn't get put on the market.
Under your leadership, does the Bureau run real cost-benefit analysis on what potential actions or rules might cost people that they're meant to help?
We do now. It goes through the OIRA process, which is a fundamental hallmark of that process. It's not required by statute, but we would suggest that would be a good reform from Congress to add to the CFPB.
Well, great. Thank you very much. And I just want to emphasize what the chairman said earlier, that while some of these measures may have been well-intentioned to begin with, when you start doing some of these rules and you make more expensive consumers, you actually are harming the people that you think that you're trying to help. With that, Mr. Chairman, I would notice I'm only 3 seconds over.
Thank you, sir. Well done. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to start by seconding the comments made by my colleague from Virginia regarding the treatment of federal employees. But Mr. Vought, I want to talk about CFPB. You're aware of the fact that since 2011, the CFPB has returned $21 billion to consumers who were cheated in some way. Are you aware of that fact?
I'm also aware that it has raised costs on the same consumers by
Are you aware of that
$370 billion.
fact, Mr.? Are you aware of the fact
Yes.
that it returned $21 billion? I was listening to one of my colleagues here about the costs imposed, and I will say to Maryland consumers who were cheated out of their money, they were glad that there was an agency there to help them out. But you're in favor of getting rid of the CFPB, right? You'd like to get rid of it entirely.
Yes.
Okay. And so as the person in charge of it right now, you're doing that because you understand there's a statutory requirement. Is that correct?
We have statutes that we are executing and enforcing in line with those responsibilities.
Right. So your ultimate goal is to eliminate the agency, and so I interpret your actions to mean you're taking the bare minimum necessary to comply with the statute. Is that fair?
We are taking an approach to do as little damage as possible. That doesn't mean that we're taking an approach to do our supervision or our enforcement as little as possible. We're sticking to the law. We're interested in reforms to the agency that would take it away from it being, in our minds, structurally defective. And we are complying with all court orders to do so.
But you're also taking court orders that required payments to consumers and essentially allowing the entities that were found liable for returning money to consumers. You're letting them off the hook in many cases, aren't you?
If there were not grounds for the original enforcement action that took place,
So-
because there wasn't a statute, it was a novel legal theory. We have a whole set of guidance on why we are taking the actions that we are taking.
So even if a court found that there was a statute that made an action allowable, you still, in many cases or some
We've
cases.
complied with all court orders.
I didn't.
I'm not sure what you're
Well, let's look at some of these particular cases. I do want to ask you about the case of Pennsylvania Higher Education Assistance Agency and the National Collegiate Student Loan Trust. The companies have been ordered to pay $5 million over student loan servicing failures. Despite that order, when you took over, you essentially negotiated a settlement that helped the companies rather than the plaintiffs in this case, right?
CFPB does not have authority over bankruptcy law. That was a bankruptcy case.
Well, my understanding is the courts found differently. Let me ask you about another case or set of cases or non-cases. Is it true that just a single enforcement action has been open since February 2025?
We have taken action with regard to companies that we have had concerns with. We are continuing about 5 enforcement cases from the previous director. I got asked this question. I'm not quite sure which one it refers to, whether it refers to Built or another action that we're taking, but I'm happy to respond to the instance of the one.
Well, my question is just, is it the case that you've only opened one new case since you've been in charge?
I want to further understand what it means to open this case, and that if you have a company name, I'd be better able to respond to it. I think the general point, Senator, is that we have spent our time aligning the enforcement docket with our priorities, and we've had a number of cases that we've had to drop. That does not mean that we are not using our enforcement tools. We are, in fact, continuing 5 cases that we think are important, but we also have a different approach to the enforcement. We want reconciliation, remediation, and so a company like, two examples, Built, we saw something in the news that was concerning. We reached out to the company, and before it got to the adversarial part of the process, they were able to fix their issues. Similarly, with credit reporting agencies, we saw things in the news that were concerning to us. We reached out to them. So we are doing the job. We're doing it differently than past leadership.
I think that if you were to ask a lot of consumers who are being cheated right now, they would say that the fact that you only brought one case since February of 2025 suggests it's your belief that there are not lots of scams out there that could be pursued. That's what this agency was established for.
Thank you for your time,
Pursue those
Senator.
scams, and you're just not doing it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Britt, before you start, here's what I'm going to do. If you go over 5 minutes, I'm going to cut you off. That's just the way this is going to work from this point forward. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm well aware. I saw it yesterday. I'm gonna keep it right there. Thank you for being here. Really appreciate it. Let's actually pick up there. So when you're looking at, tell me about the CFPB budget in general? Kind of what numbers are you working with, big term?
Right now, we have about $465 million as an annual budget, down from $800 million under the previous director, who was kind of stockpiling funds for the new administration.
So let's also, so 800 million from the previous director, and it's my understanding that he only spent about 28 million on educating consumers, protecting them against fraud, telling them kind of what was out there and what to be looking for. Do you know if that's correct?
I don't have that at my fingertips, but I'm happy to confirm it later.
Well, what I would think, and you've got like about, I think, 3.8 billion in penalties, but if we are looking to actually protect consumers, then we need to invest more in that. So
Agreed.
certainly would have liked to have seen that under the previous administration, and hope that to the extent we continue anything, we do a better job of educating people about what's in front of them. So I know you've already talked about this with Senators Scott and Ricketts and Kennedy and others, but what should Congress learn about over the last several years about the risk of giving one unelected director so much unchecked authority?
Well, I would say, Senator, the biggest issue is not the one director as much as it is not being subject to the appropriations process, which you sit under. The main defect was putting it under the Fed, in which you have no ability to have any sense of responsibility to come to Congress and justify how you're running the agency. I mean, you come to do these semi-annual reports, but when push comes to shove, as a member of the Appropriations Committee, that is your main source of accountability, and that is what has made, I think, the agency have a little bit of an edge that has proven so problematic.
No, I completely agree. Let me ask you this. What changes have you made to the Bureau's enforcement approach to ensure that enforcement's focused on clear violations rather than novel legal theories or political priorities? I mean, what we found over the last several years is there's a lack of certainty. When you're regulating by blog post and people, and you're actually trying to enforce, you're creating laws through enforcement, it creates uncertainty that people need to know exactly what the rules are so that they can follow them. Tell me what you've done to try to fix that.
We've been very clear with our priorities. We've stated those priorities. We've taken a lot of steps to cancel enforcements that were done on novel legal theories that we didn't have the statute to do. And we focused on identifiable victims, actual consumer harm that's material and measurable. And we've also taken the view that if there are state regulators or other agencies taking action, that they can take the lead on that, and we will fill in the gaps.
Let's talk a little bit about 1071. I've been very concerned about the small business lending rule and what it actually means for community banks. I think the compliance cost alone is just astronomical for some. It puts real pressure on small lenders, and also it raises privacy concerns. It's something I spoke to the previous director about, that I think that it would ultimately report sensitive information and is not the way not the way things should be done. Based on the Bureau's review, what were the biggest problems with the 1071 rule, and how would those burdens have affected community banks' ability to actually serve Main Street businesses?
Well, if that rule had gone into effect, and thank you for your leadership on that, we were very concerned that small business lending would dry up. And when you raise the cost of information collection, we have one study that since the beginning of the CFPB, there's been 29 million pages required of regulated entities, 14,000 FTEs needing to be hired just to do the paperwork. And under 1071, 13 data fields were required, not over 80. And so none of these were aimed at what the statutory purpose was, and we slimmed it down to 16, and those extra 3 were directly intertwined with the original 13.
Well, I appreciate that. I think that if one thing it showed us was also just the importance of taking a look at the cumulative impact of all of these things, and also when you broaden that stuff, there's a real cost to it, to consumer privacy and to the ability to actually do good work. So thank you.
Yep.
Well done, Senator Britt. Can you help my other folks do the same? Thank you. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director Vought, let me ask you this. Do you believe that veterans who have served this country and put their lives on the line deserve support from the CFPB when they have been defrauded or there's some consumer protection issue?
Absolutely.
And in fact, you believe it so much so, I think you have it in your humility pledge that that's part of your statutory duty. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I'm going to submit for the record a letter that I have here. Actually, it's a story from Las Vegas where I have a military veteran who has a dispute with a mortgage lender. Unfortunately, he is not getting, thank you, is not getting any response and support from the CFPB.
Happy to take a look at it.
And I want more than that. I want to know what you're actually doing for veterans. I want a reporting from the CFPB, your staff, what you're doing to help veterans. If you think it's limited to a statutory duty, I want to know that. I want a briefing from you and your office specifically what you're doing, and that it's not being challenged in the courts right now. Would you agree to do that for me?
I'm leaving the post on August 1st.
I don't care who's leaving. You're
So-
there right now. Send somebody to my office. Are you willing to do that?
We're happy to take a look at the request and
So you will
consider it.
not give me a report?
Not in this moment, no.
No, not at this moment. At some point in time, come to my office.
We will give you whatever
be nice,
information with regard to
Director
our work
Vought.
on
Thank
veterans that
you.
you're asking for.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. You know, it is not lost on me in your opening that you talk about how the CFPB has been weaponized and that it is not following the law and it is out of control, because that is exactly what you're doing with the OMB. Since you've been there, as the director of OMB, you have defunded programs and whole agencies Congress authorized and appropriated funds. Even though you're in your statement, you recognize we are the appropriators. Thank you very much for recognizing that. You have delayed and denied funding for programs Congress supported with law and money. You have supported the firing commissioners and staff at multiple federal agencies. You think this should be a bipartisan commission, but you support eliminating all the Democrats that are on commissions on all these federal agencies. Experienced and qualified people who had responsibility to solve problems for the American people and enhance our standing in the world. Not only are prices higher because of the work that you have done in this administration with the president, the world is more dangerous. Let me ask you this. You've been asked about the Housing Trust Fund. We have just passed a bipartisan, bicameral housing trust fund, housing fund to address the housing needs in this country. Your boss didn't support it. Are you committed to sending the funds there when we appropriate those funds based on the bipartisan, bicameral law that we have passed when it comes to housing, the Road to 21st Century Housing Bill?
Senator, we have every intention of apportioning all funds that have been appropriated.
Without any politics, without any type of DEI or wokeism invoked into that?
We're going to make sure that it's spent based on the priorities of this administration, but we're going to do everything we can to get the money out the door.
Well, let me just say this to you, because based on your priorities, and I say this truly, you're putting us in more danger. Let me put a point on this. HIDTA, which is the high-intensity drug trafficking areas that I have worked with as a former Attorney General, there are programs across the country, they're bipartisan support for them. They disrupt drug trafficking organizations. They combat the ongoing fentanyl crisis that your boss talks about all the time. They protect our communities from drug addiction, overdoses, and crime. Your office decided it was time to delay funding to HIDTA. You know what happened because of your delay? The delay was so severe that HIDTA programs had to furlough staff and scale back enforcement activities. That's what you're causing here. And you have no authority to do so. And you always talk about court cases. The only reason we're in court is because the court is challenging the decisions you have made and overruling them. And all my ask is, stop playing the games. Stop playing the games. Stop picking winners and losers. If we send something to you in a bipartisan way, we hope you respect it. We hope you respect it. I am frustrated because I have seen time and time again your political you sit right here and you talk about wokeism and the last administration, and you always invoke the last administration. And the only reason you are is because you know why? Who the administration was prior to that? Was the Trump administration. They didn't go through this whole-scale illegally violating the appropriations process. But now all of a sudden, that's happening under your watch. You got to question what is going on here. So I appreciate it. My time is up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. Senator Banks.
Director Vought, you've been the president's point man on shipbuilding, and I wanted to shift gears a little bit, if you don't mind, and
Not at all.
ask you about how that's going. You're well aware of the catastrophic program failures of the LCS, the DDG 1000, the frigate. How are the president's efforts going? How can we speed up the process of shipbuilding? And by the way, what can we learn from our allies? You've talked before about the Finland model. What can we learn from our allies to fix this problem?
Thanks for the question, Senator. I'm always happy to talk about shipbuilding. You know, the Finland model is probably one of the most important paradigm shifts that we have going in shipbuilding, and it's not because we want to just purchase foreign ships. It's because we want actual domestic investment. So the Finland model is with 2 companies, 11 icebreakers. We can't really build icebreakers here in this country at scale. Finland knows how to do this. The first 4 are going to be built in Finland in 2 different places, and then the next 7 will be built in Florida and in Galveston, Texas. One of those companies invested $1 billion in the Galveston facility that will make them a shipyard that can compete with other things domestically. And I will just tell you, having been there to be part of the unveiling process, all of those American workers were extremely excited about the jobs that would be coming from that. So I believe that is one of the most important things that you could help us with. But again, putting additional pressure on our defense community to manage their supply lines, to meet their deadlines. All of our programs are behind, and I've been to most of the shipyards. They are getting faster. I think they're taking it seriously, but we need to keep the pressure on and more competition, more yards, and to treat this as if we don't have the time, because that's our scarcest resource.
What's your response to critics, some of my colleagues who are critical of that concept that you're taking jobs away from Americans and sending them to foreign countries?
I think it's absolutely wrong. Where we are doing this is where we are either behind or where we needed added capacity. For instance, no one's going to be taking DDGs away from Mississippi or Maine, but we need the opportunity to have other countries provide additional shipyards that can add more and scale to what we're doing. And there are auxiliary ships as well that we just, you know, they're the last priority right now. And if we're going to have either additional Navy capacity or more commercial shipping, I'll be up in Philadelphia tomorrow for a MARAD christening. If we're going to do that, we're going to need more yards and to have business that's coming into those yards.
The big beautiful bill gave a substantial amount of money toward using artificial intelligence in shipbuilding. Do you have an update on that? Maybe more.
Well, I think
for the Navy, but
not with specificity, but you're seeing the impact in our operations overseas. You're seeing the extent to which these boats are already on the water being used effectively. I think one of them was a search and rescue of an airman. And so, you know, that is an incredible example of innovation. And I know that the Secretary is pushing very hard on innovation in this area.
President Trump's 2027 budget request includes a historic $1.5 trillion for our national defense, including $350 billion in mandatory spending. Last month, you sent an $87.6 billion supplemental request to Congress for urgent needs stemming from Operation Fury, Epic Fury. And this week, the Democrats voted against the moving forward with the NDAA because of the scale, they say, of that figure. Can you help explain in concrete terms why these requests are so important?
Well, this is a one-time level of $1.5 trillion. It's not intended to be each year, but the reason why it's one time is we have a particular moment in time with the leadership that we have, with the president that we have, where we're trying to get the industry to scale, not just add another shift, build new facilities in states across the country. And so we think there's a business case to do that. It's kind of a head scratcher that they didn't already. But to the extent that we need to do multi-year procurement agreements with the money right now so that they can then distribute it to their supply chain, we have to do that now, and we need the money up front. So that's why we're doing it in areas of munitions, but also things like F-35s. This is our moment in time, and we can't miss the opportunity.
It's really about supporting our men and women in uniform, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I yield back.
Great example. Senator Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Vogt, I want to understand a bit better this OMB recently proposed rule that would give power over discretionary federal grants to the OMB director and to a handful of political appointees. I'm talking about how this rule empowers senior political appointees to conduct so-called pre-issuance reviews of discretionary grants to make sure that they, and I quote, advance the president's policy priorities, unquote, and do not, among other things, promote, quote, anti-American values. So my first question is it your view that you have the authority to put the wishes or the priorities of the president and his political appointees ahead of the will of Congress who authorized these federal laws and that the federal government should be implementing and doing what Congress said that should do?
No, a couple things I would just say there. Number one, all these NOFOs are not going through OMB. Some may not. But there is nothing a part of 2 CFR or the executive order that it stems from that causes all NOFOs go through OMB. Secondly, with regard to the statutes and the appropriations process, we're not defying the will of Congress. You give us discretion about how we spend money. That is what the executive branch agencies do, and we're going to do that in line with this president's objectives and not career staff.
So the clear feeling amongst folks in my home state is that what's happening is that there is a political screen that is being imposed on grants. And here's an example of one of these situations. One of my constituents in Minnesota was participating in an NIH-funded clinical trial to treat stomach cancer. The trial was canceled, unexpectedly halted. This person never received their surgery, and the trial never resumed. And I've got to tell you, to the researchers and physicians in Minnesota and the patients, this smacks of political interference in a health grant that seems as if the rule that you are proposing would sanction. Here's another example I want to ask you about, and I'd like your response to this. So top researchers in Minnesota recently made a breakthrough in detecting and treating cancer in kids with a National Cancer Institute grant. And what the study did is it looked at what makes African American children more likely to die from blood and bone cancer. So it seems to me, according to your proposed rule, this kind of research wouldn't be allowed. You wouldn't fund it because you believe that studying why American children with African ancestry get cancer and would die from it would conflict with your anti-DEI rules. So is it true that that's how you see this rule being imposed here?
How our DEI policies, of which we are against DEI policies, we have intended to get rid of DEI policies wherever we possibly can.
So what impact would it
How
have?
that would impact with that particular grant would be a decision for a political official, policy official at NIH. That is why the NIH director would be making that determination to be able to marry up the intent of a program. There's a whole institute for disparity.
So a political appointee would be in the position, according to your proposed rule, of deciding whether this health grant, studying why black kids in this country are more likely to get sick and die from blood and brain cancer. They would be the one who decides whether this grant should be allowed, and not the scientists and the doctors and the people who know about
Senator,
preventing cancer.
we believe that it is important to have the executive agency's leadership, the cabinet secretaries, their undersecretaries, the people that are in charge who have come in with this administration to make the final decisions. And that doesn't mean they don't benefit from the use of from career recommendations, from peer review studies. All of that will be taken into account. But the days of us funding CRT because our agency heads didn't know it was going on, we're not doing that anymore.
Would you say that this particular grant that
That's
I
a
just
decision
described to
that's
you
a decision for the director of NIH
would
to make.
conflict with the DEI rules that that your administration
I think
is?
it would be a granular discussion that the director of NIH would have to make a decision on.
I think this is just an example of the absurdity and the bias of this proposed rule, and the danger of what happens when you bring political ideology into grant-making processes, particularly around healthcare. I mean, researchers across the country, including in Minnesota, are making breakthroughs in medical advances, and it is not a place for political appointees to be putting their finger on the scale and saying, nope, this seems too woke for me, and therefore these kids aren't going to get the help that they want. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no more questions.
Senator Warnock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Director Vought, have you or anyone you know ever had a medical emergency?
Of course.
Do you personally know anyone who has ever gone into debt because of a medical emergency?
Yes.
When the president, or before the president took office, the CFPB finalized a rule that would have removed almost $50 billion in medical debt from the credit reports of tens of millions of Americans. Debt, which, by the way, is often incorrect. But Director Vought, within months of your taking office, the CFPB reversed itself and joined with the very same debt collectors who were set to profit off medical debt to overturn this rule. How did your decision in any way help those tens of millions of Americans, some of whom are watching today, being crushed by nearly $50 billion in medical debt? How was this helpful for them?
Senator, the statute specifically ensures that credit reporting agencies can take into account medical debt. So until you change that statute, we don't have the ability to just regulate however we want to.
Well, you could have tried to narrow the rule, right?
No, we really could not have.
You could have tried to fight it in court.
No, our oath is to the statutes that you have passed to faithfully execute those laws.
You were not able
what
to
we
fight
could
it in
just
court?
win in court about.
That's not something you could have fought in court.
Not if we have a fundamental disagreement about what the statute requires.
You and I can agree to disagree. I think you chose not to fight it in court, and you joined forces with those debt collectors. A year ago, I, along with nearly 30 of my colleagues, demanded answers from you about this decision, and I request unanimous consent to enter our letter into the record. You never responded. Do you ever respond? Do you ever plan to respond to my letter?
Much of the correspondence that we've gotten has to do with litigation that we're a part of. And so we can't speak and respond to letters of which we're going to have to provide answers in court. And that is a reality that we face. But we do intend to have a very open relationship with Congress, and I'm happy to correspond with you on a regular basis.
Do you ever plan to respond to our letter?
I'm leaving the post on August 1st. So there's a lot of things that hopefully Brian Johnson will be doing, and one of those is those types of correspondence.
Well, you're leaving on August 1st. You've done quite a bit of damage in a few months. We had a simple ask: show your work. Publicly disclose the data and the analysis to justify the CFPB's position that the medical debt rule was unnecessary or unlawful. Since you didn't respond, I'll ask you now, how many Americans were projected to have their medical debt wiped from their credit scores by the CFPB's medical debt rule, which you overturned?
I don't know, but the rule was unlawful.
The answer is 15 million. Medical debt can ruin credit scores, which can make it impossible for folks to ever buy a home. Do you know how many more mortgages consumers would have been able to afford each year if you hadn't overturned the rule?
I don't have that off the top of my head.
So the answer is 22,000. So 22,000 mortgages that consumers would have been able to afford, 15 million Americans who were set to have their medical debt wiped from their credit scores. I've seen this up close in the state of Georgia, and the impact, the real human costs behind the very cold and clinical language about statutory authority, which I think you do have, questions that you could have raised. CFPB, by its nature, is advocating for everyday consumers. And I don't see how any of your actions suggest that you've been advocating for the people that I represent. It seems to me that this shouldn't be a partisan issue. People on both sides of the aisle know that medical emergencies can happen to anybody. They can happen to anyone. We've seen that up close in this very body over the last few weeks. But thanks to you, there are now families who cannot buy a house, they're hounded by debt collectors, and they're denied business loans, all because they got sick. Director Vought, you've spent the last 18 months decimating the CFPB and its consumer protections, and I think families across America will be better off when you're gone. I'd like a response to my letter. Thank you.
Senator Blunt Rochester is actually next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for holding this hearing on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. When I hear the Bureau's name, the two words that stand out for me are consumers and protection. This agency has brought $21 billion to American consumers. It's been a watchdog. And in a time where people are struggling to make ends meet, it is probably more important now than ever. Director Vought, you said the CFPB is now focused on what you call, quote, actual identifiable consumer harm. And I'd like to see how the standard applies to the people that we in Congress have created the CFPB for. A few of my colleagues have already brought up our veterans and our military families. And last month we had a hearing on housing. We actually had a hearing on affordability, and I raised concerns about military families and the CFPB's role enforcing the Military Lending Act. To me, our financial security is tied to our military readiness. And since 2011, service members from every state and every military base have filed more than 400,000 complaints with the CFPB, which tells me that they believe that the Bureau was somewhere they could turn to when something went wrong. Is the Military Lending Act violation against an active duty service member actual consumer harm by your definition? Like when they actually go through these challenges with, as someone said, whether it's a car dealership or a payday lender?
Yes, of course, and we prioritize it in our guidance.
And you did say that you prioritize it. Can you tell me, since you've been in the position, has the enforcement increased, decreased, or stayed the same?
Well, it's specific in terms of enforcement versus supervision and how we deal with
increase, decrease, or stayed the same?
We take
He's
it
on
very,
a tight time frame.
We take it very seriously.
You said you take it seriously. It's in your humility pledge. Has it increased, decreased, or stayed the same since you've been in office?
We believe that we have a heightened focus on military.
Can you share the
lending
data with us to let us know?
Sure.
Okay, because that's what reporting is about: increase, decrease, or stay the same. Again, you reported it's a priority, but we don't see the results of it. The same is true. I've worked on bipartisan legislation, clean slate legislation, to help people who have returned to their communities. They deserve a second chance. Your CFPB withdrew guidance that was intended to improve the accuracy of background screening reports. Would you consider a person losing a job or an apartment because the background check report includes an expunged record or fails to show charges were dismissed as an example of an actual consumer harm?
We have deprioritized those types of endeavors, which was a hallmark of the previous director.
Okay, so you deprioritized that. You say that you care about service members, but you don't know how many you've helped or not helped. The website,
well, it's based on the portal, and I'd love to get you follow-up information for it. I'm happy to do that.
If it's a priority, I would think that would be in what you have before you. You would know it. You also have deleted or removed thousands of pages from the website. This is supposed to be a watchdog agency. People should be able to go there and find information that helps them with payday lending scams or medical debt or things like that.
Senator, that's false. Would you like me to
Actually, it's
explain
not
that?
false. There's reporting that you have taken away.
There's reporting,
and
it's
you
not
put
true.
it in archives.
Which is what every administration does.
Some of it.
The Obama
But these are
administration would
things.
do that.
This is my time. These are things that consumers need. These are resources. Know your rights. These are things that people need easy access to, not to go find an archive. That's number one. And then also, I just wanted to give you an opportunity in the last bit of time that I have left. First of all, I agree with Senator Warner. The assault on federal workers and on people who serve us every day has been palpable, and I could give you a grade on that. But when you said, I want to give you an opportunity to clarify, you said that CDFIs are woke. This is bipartisan. We worked on it all together. What do you mean by CDFIs are woke?
It means that they
And
are,
how do you define woke? Because that's another thing. This administration says they don't believe in woke, but then the president said there's not a definition for woke.
guys will
How do
have
you
to-
define woke?
You all will have to continue this conversation.
I'd love for him to answer that last question because it implicates all of us
Certainly understand the
for
implication.
CDFIs.
Senator Kim, the floor is yours.
Look, I'll give the director a chance to be able to respond.
Thank you, Senator. It's dividing people on the basis of race and identity. Just give you examples, $6.2 million for Clearinghouse CDFI, which hosted a Pride fashion show called Sashay the Runway, promoting transgender housing.
You define people by race.
Dividing based on race.
Look, let me pick up in a similar place. One is that I led a letter alongside Senator Warren about requesting information about your recent efforts to overhaul the CFPB Consumer Complaints Portal. I have real concerns about this overhaul. I mean, first, there's no legal requirement that consumers first dispute a credit reporting complaint with their credit reporting company or wait 45 days before reaching out to the CFPB. So I guess I wanted to ask you, why is this happening? Why is this fundamental tool that has helped so many Americans something that you're putting more restrictions on top of?
Senator, there is a requirement under the law to go first to the credit reporting agency, but as to why, the portal is exploding because of a phenomena in the marketplace with bots and people and influencers suggesting that if you submit multiple submissions to the portal, that it guarantees that their credit reporting will be fixed, that if there is an actual problem with their credit report, that if they just call it fraud, that's going to be fixed if it puts.
How many
portal.
of the 5.8 million consumers who are filed do you say fall under that category?
As it pertains to the credit reporting, or asking a
No,
backlog
about
question?
about the bots and the other things that you're saying that
We're
is
trying to
causing-
assess that, but massive numbers, and one of the reasons, like 30 days, 45 days with an extension, isn't that where you would want to direct people immediately? Get your complaint into the person, the company that can actually fix it. We will do our best, and we will submit all of the complaints to the CRAs
I just want to share with you, this has been an incredibly effective tool for so many people in New Jersey, and they have been really frustrated about these restrictions. I want to pass it along to you because I've been hearing from so many that have used this in the past and are now saying, why is this changed? You know, a woman named Mary telling me how she was able to use this to be able to get paid out on something that she sold online. These are the types of real problem solving that we're trying to address. I want to just shift gears here for a second. You talked about just some of the challenges that we're seeing right now about paying out grants and proposals. I wanted to just check in with you about FEMA, for instance. This is something where Senator Gary Peters and I have sent forward a letter talking about this discrepancy here where we've seen approval rates for red states remain at about 89%, whereas for blue states, that's dropped down to 23%, a 66% difference, whereas in the past, we've seen this roughly equal historically. Can you explain to the American people why the White House, when it's receiving these proposals from FEMA, seems to be taking a different path?
The only path that we're taking is to be a very good steward of taxpayer resources. So we are reviewing these FEMA requests, but we are not doing it on the basis of any political agenda. And we're trying to make sure that every dollar spent is spent wisely.
So you're saying no politics involved?
We're making sure that all of this money is going out on the basis of a sound use of taxpayer dollars.
I cannot comprehend and accept that answer because what we've seen historically is FEMA doling out the resources of the American people to American people who are in challenge and harm's way from disasters. And that has been equal. This is a clear outlier that is happening. FEMA has a review process that is credible and adds predictability to the process, and your administration has clearly, and the White House in particular, has clearly gone a different path. The last thing I just want to raise, building off of what Senator Smith said earlier, the real concern right now about scientific and medical research, especially when it comes to your administration cutting off or potentially cutting off support, scientific research often goes years beyond just the 4 years of a particular administration. Basing it based off of just the priorities of one single administration can be hugely damaging. Do you understand that?
Let me give you an example from even the Obama administration. The
I'm just
Obama
asking you if
no,
you understand the damage
the
that
Obama
comes.
administration had a policy against gain-of-function research. Tony Fauci violated that policy and did gain-of-function research. A political appointee should have been able to ensure that funds did not go to the Echo Health Alliance and to the Wuhan Institute. That is the type of supervision that is important on a bipartisan basis and should be a hallmark on a...
It's a clear damage that you're pushing for. I hope you move in a different direction. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Senator Gallego.
Thank you. Acting Director Vogt, at your nomination here for OMB Director, you looked me and many of us here directly in the eye, and you swore under oath that this administration would protect veterans and their benefits. Today, in my opinion, your record really shows a totally different story, because you certainly have not protected the Office of Service Members Affairs. And from what we're hearing right now is that you want to cut its staff in half. So how is gutting that office that exists to defend service members anything but really, truly abandoning them?
Well, Senator, your question is presuming a rift that is not in place right now. We have taken this as a very big priority. We've made it a priority in our enforcement guidelines.
But you are
from an educational
But you are planning to cut staff from that department.
Consolidate where we can make consolidations. But
to be clear, you're going to be cutting a very important office that is very important for service members to actually have protections when it comes to consumer protections.
We believe that we can have consolidated workflows at the Bureau that continue to make this a priority.
Well, I certainly don't think that that's the case, but that's how you choose to staff. Now, let's look at how you actually choose to enforce the law. So Navy Federal Credit Union was caught charging its members millions in illegal surprise overdraft fees. These members are active duty veterans, DOD employees, and their families. I was once a young Marine. Every dollar really does matter when you're a young Marine. And the last CFPB ordered Navy Federal to pay a $15 million penalty and refund more than $80 million back to those service members' pockets. I think that's a very just outcome. But you tore up that consent order, am I correct?
It was based on a decision of which the previous administration had put out guidance that was not lawful.
Okay.
So when the company was then penalized for it, there was no grounds for that consent order.
Did any of that $80 million go back to any of those veterans when you tore that up?
They paid their $15 million in the penalty.
They paid the $15 million, but the people that actually were ripped off by Navy Federal Credit Union did not get anything.
They weren't.
The previous order would have given those $80 million back to the people that were ripped off.
And that would have been paid by service members into the Navy Federal Credit Union.
But right now, for a fact, we know that they're not getting the $80 million back.
The underlying issue is overdraft
your
fees.
decision basically means that these men and women who are ripped off are not getting $80 million back, because the previous order actually would have done that.
It was illegal.
It's not illegal. It was just, and you just basically tore up, and you didn't replace it by anything. So like these men and women are now left $80 million.
Because there's no authority to deal with overdraft fees, which, by the way, makes sure that we have overdraft fee protection.
There was an order specifically designed to bring restitution to these veterans that were incredibly ripped off, and you could have found another way to do it, but instead you just let them continue to be ripped off, and that is your decision. And so just to follow up with that, the Navy Federal is just one of the 42 enforcement actions that your CFPB has dropped or rolled back. For the other companies you left off the hook altogether, how many of those 42 companies and lawbreakers had discussions with you or anyone in the CFPB, OMB, or the White House about dropping, weakening, retracting any of these orders? And please, I remind you, you're under oath.
I have no idea.
You have no idea.
I don't make decisions based on who approaches me. I make it based on the
Well, you made a decision on Navy Federal Credit.
facts.
You ripped off a lot of veterans, at least up to the tune of $80 million. You did make that decision, right?
I certainly made the decision with regard to Navy
But you're not making any
Federal.
other further decisions somehow.
I made the decision with every one of those consent orders, enforcement actions.
And so for the 42 companies, you just don't know?
You're asking what interactions our external affairs has with various stakeholders, of which we have an open door policy with anyone. So if no matter where you are on a policy basis, we're having conversations with everyone.
Have you had any of those conversations about rolling back some of these orders, some of these penalties, or anything like that, to the best of your knowledge? And you don't have to give me a round number?
Every decision that I have made has been based on the
So now you are making decisions, because like about 2-3 sentences ago said you're not making decisions.
Said actually every decision that I have made, which is the entirety of the decisions at CFPB under my tenure, has been based on the law, the common sense approach to the way that we have run the department.
Okay, sure. If that's the case, will you provide the logs of all your meetings and the minutes?
We will comply with all FOIA laws on the books. I'm not going to.
I'm not asking about FOIA laws. I'm asking you to,
No, I'm not.
as oversight as our oversight capability here and capacity, I think we should have a right to see these logbooks.
We will comply with all FOIA laws.
That's not what I'm asking.
Well,
I'm
we
asking
will
for
comply with
you
all
to
FOIA
provide
laws.
us for actual logs, communications with these 42 companies.
Senator's time is up. Senator Also Brooks has the floor.
Thank you so much, Chair Scott and Ranking Member Warren and Director Vought. I have been waiting to have the opportunity to come back face to face with you to ask for an explanation for what I regard as absolutely depraved, I use that word again, and draconian actions to decimate our public institutions, politicize federal grant programs, to stall funding for NIH and for CDC public health programs, harming our research institutions, dismantling the CFPB. And I have to tell you, I couldn't wait to get here on behalf of the 160,000 federal employees in my state. The actions taken toward our federal employees has been evil. Absolutely evil, and it is the most galling aspect of what I regard as shameful tenure at the OMB as director has been your outright animosity and blatant hostility toward our federal workers. And I haven't made this up. In fact, I'm going to read your own words that you famously said without remorse. You said, "We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly regarded as the villain." This is so evil. And the 150,000 federal workers who are in my state, who come together, these are the patriots of our country, who've worked, many of them, for decades. They didn't care whether the president was a Democrat or Republican. They are here to serve the American people, and they will not forget how they were treated and what was said, and neither will I. And in fact, one Marylander who lost his federal job said the following: "I can't tell you how terrifying it is to be a parent of 2 children faced with the thought that you cannot provide for your family." And so I ask you, is that the kind of trauma that you were talking about? Did you intend to sow terror for parents who need to provide for their families? Is that the kind of trauma that you were anticipating?
Senator, I've explained those comments on numerous occasions. I was referring to bureaucracies and not the career civil servants that do the job. Many of those bureaucracies are weaponized against the American people. We've taken steps to deal with that, but as it pertains to civil servants, I have a very high regard for them and the work that they do.
Well, I think the words speak for themselves. I really do. I don't think anybody can say that combination of words and have it be explicable. It is inexplicable, and you continue to traumatize them this fall by issuing a memo directing agencies to prepare for mass firings that I might note the court later found were illegal. So did the workers deserve, because they feel traumatized. They were here, I saw them, they were lining up in these hallways talking to me, many of them in tears.
Senator, you shouldn't have shut the government down for more than 2 months on 2 separate occasions. You don't think that traumatized the same federal workers?
Well, you know what? Again, let me just say this. The Jedi mind trick does not work. The Republicans around here are in charge of everything. The House, the Senate,
they
and
need your
the
votes
White
on
House.
a bipartisan.
Well, you know what?
appropriations
Again,
basis.
I'm going to go to my next question, but I will not fall for the Jedi mind trick that when the Republicans have the keys to the kingdom, that anything regarding a shutdown has to do with Democrats. But again, can you tell me how much money did the cuts save the American taxpayer? All of these cuts, how much did it save us?
Well, we had the most successful fiscal year that we've had, I believe, in history in 2025. We ended fiscal futility in this country. We saved about $15 billion below the level that you were able to do with the continuing resolution. We passed rescissions bills for the first time since 1992. We were able to support an appropriations process that led to $20 billion less than the previous year. Outside of those 2 shutdowns, which were something that we fought against very hard.
Well, let me just, because my time is tolling,
worked.
sir, I do have another question. I would beg to differ that this has been fiscally successful. And if you call fiscally successful, whatever these cuts are, people still cannot afford their groceries, gas, utilities. So if you regard this as a fiscally successful, I still beg to differ. But I want to turn to CFPB very quickly because it seems that you're doing everything in your power to make things more unaffordable for American families, including trying to fire half of the workforce at the agency that has returned $21 billion to consumers. On April 16th, I led many of my colleagues in a letter requesting information on this incredibly short-sighted proposal and noting that this plan would force reductions of 80% within CFPB's Office of Enforcement, which is literally tasked with enforcing consumer financial laws and holding financial service providers accountable. You haven't responded to our letter in 3 months. I hope that you will. But how can the CFPB meet its statutory enforcement obligations with only 1/3 of its enforcement staff?
Unfortunately, the senator's time is up, so I will not allow the witness to respond to the question.
Thank
you. We will have that as a question for the record, which will give by next Thursday, it will give the director, acting director, or the official director, if we get a change in administration there, 45 days to respond to that. So while I'm cutting you off and taking the liberty to explain what we're going to do, I will ask that that question be submitted for the record.
Okay.
And if the acting director of vote leaves before the 45-day clock is up, I will ask the next person in charge to answer your question.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vought, thank you for being here. Tell me the one DOGE initiative that you think is the best example of the work that was done before DOGE was quiesced in CFPB, or you can go anywhere else. But just give me the best example of what you thought was an exquisite realization of value that came through cuts that worked their way through the DOGE office.
Well, I do believe that the reductions in force as a tool.
Which specific one?
In general.
Yeah, but I want to get into specifics. You and I have different backgrounds. Mine was in enterprise implementation. I did this for a living. And so I don't want a word salad answer.
Well, it's not word salad, Senator. CFPB, I'm trying to do a reduction in force.
But I'm just asking you across the board. Give me one best, because here's what I'm asking for. The DOGE office has been quiesced, okay? But there were a lot of claims of billions and billions of dollars in savings. I simply want to know where you booked them and where I can see it.
I didn't run DOGE, Senator.
You are OMB, right?
I am, but I am not DOGE.
You do track to me, and when I worked in business and we had to implement efficiency, we got engaged to come in, do activity-based accounting, whatever was necessary to identify the efficiencies. Then we go to the CEOs and say, part of this is going to be a reduction in force. We're going to do this in a methodical manner. The number one thing we want to do is absolutely have a reduction in force that looks at our best and brightest, that 18 to 25% of the organization, and make damn sure that they don't get a "you're fired" notice. And then we would send out a reduction in force and an efficiencies program that does people, technology, and infrastructure. Give me an example of where that was done over the year that DOGE was in place.
Well, I think the extent to which we
because
shut down
let me
the
back
USAID
up. The reason I'm targeting you is because I look at you as the guy who books the savings. After we work, let's say we work with whatever department it is, then we got the savings, we come to you and we say, Mr. Vought, this is no longer going to be a part of our expense run rate. You can actually tell the administration that we can decrement that cost because we've cut the savings. Give me the best example of where DOGE has done that.
Well, I have been saying in terms of...
No, because give me the best example of where a DOGE initiative,
Senator,
once they completed the work, came to you and said, Mr. Vought, you should be aware that our baseline run rate for expenses have gone down. Give me one
we
example.
have an appropriations process, Senator.
I'm sorry?
There's an appropriations process. We have put forward a budget that's $160 billion in DOGE savings.
I've heard a lot of people, including you, talk about the DOGE savings. I've worked in the business world. My understanding is the last time you worked in the business world was at B. Dalton Books when you were putting yourself through law school. Good on you. But you don't have this experience, and a lot of people that were involved in this do not have this experience. I love the idea of DOGE, but what I don't love is the idea of DOGE shit that we're picking up because people did it wrong. I spell it with a $, by the way, Mr. Chair. But at the end of the day, we've got to be honest with the American people. We had people running through here and talking about all the savings. At the end of the day, book it. Every single one of these things should have before, after, net savings, and run rate for cost. And Mr. Vought, if you would submit for the record, I may have caught you flat-footed on this one, and I apologize for that.
You don't have to apologize.
But
there's $160 billion in savings
Mr. Vought,
that we
look,
identified.
this is going to be real simple. You don't have to do anything except present to me.
I did, the budget.
A consultation for the record in written form, a consultation with the government agency that had the most documented and sustainable savings so that I can go back to North Carolina and explain where DOGE was successful. Because right now, I'm picking up a lot of bags of people who are some of the most experienced people leaving, scientists leaving NIH, these random, you were fired, oh, I'm sorry, you weren't, wrong email address. All that stuff is amateurish stuff that would have gotten me fired in my job at Price Waterhouse in a week. I want to see, but I'm willing to be open to it. You got a best case. I love being proved wrong when I'm coming out and saying something that I'm very disappointed with. I would love nothing more than a briefing before this committee on the extraordinary work of identify the target, achieve the target, book the savings, and inform the appropriations process. I'd love to see at least one of those for the record. Thank you.
Ranking Member Warren for closing comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to use this opportunity to correct the record on Acting Voughts' response to Senator Warner about his past comments and his intent to traumatize federal workers. Acting Director Vought, there is a video of you when you were president of the Center for Renewing America, and it was published by ProPublica in October 2024, in which you say, and I will quote you to yourself, "We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them not to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as villains." And then you go on to say, "We want to put them in trauma." And yet you sat here this morning, looked Senator Warner directly in the eye, and said, "You didn't say that." I just want to close here by going back where I started.
Senator was referring to my writing.
The corruption at the CFPB is costing American families. So far, it has cost them an estimated $26.5 billion. Toyota, Navy Credit, Capital One, Apple, Bank of America, Walmart, and more. No matter how many people you have hurt, if you've got the cash, Donald Trump and Mr. Vought have a pardon for you.
Thank you for your closing comments. I'll simply say that the fact of the matter on today's hearing is that the characterization of the director, acting director, ripping off veterans, I think is not only false, but it is salacious as it relates to the laws that were not written by this Congress not being able to be enforced by this acting director. Second thing I'd say is that according to also Senator Brooks, the question about government shutdown, it takes 60 votes to overcome a shutdown. Nearly every Republican voted to keep the government open. Nearly every Democrat, if not every single Democrat, voted to shut the government down. Those are just facts as well. Finally, I'd say that as it relates to a simple rhetorical question that I have, what is the impact when credit scores are no longer reliable because some folks with good intentions dilute the effectiveness of objective information? Leads to fewer people having access to credit, more people receiving higher rates, and a negative impact overall. For senators who wish to submit questions for the hearing record, those questions are due 1 week from today, Thursday, July 23rd. Acting director or his successor will have up to 45 days from that day to submit your responses to the questions. For the record, thank you. The committee is adjourned.